Hello, everyone. I thought I would take a few minutes and do a video here about the underused housing tax, which we often abbreviate now the UHT. It's been causing a lot of anxiety for a lot of our clients and a lot of other people I know. So I thought I would take a few minutes here and kind of do a little bit of an explainer video on exactly kind of how this works, what it's about, and whether you might be affected by it. This is by no means intended to be a catch-all. I will highly advise you to do your own research, to check with your own accountant or other professional if you are not currently a client of mine or our firm, and just to make sure that you do your due diligence. That being said, I've spent a lot of time looking over this. I've called CRA multiple times. I've tried to do a lot of the hard work for you so that I can explain this to you in a lot simpler language than it's been explained by the CRA. All right, so underused housing tax. First thing that you need to know is that most of you are probably not going to be affected by this. But because there's some of you that will be, it might be helpful if all of you kind of know who is, so you can be prepared just in case. Like almost anything that I do, I generally try to go back to the why. Why did this underused housing tax even get created in the first place? And despite its name, its primary objective was initially to discourage foreign ownership of Canadian property. So as kind of a byproduct of that, if you're a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada, most of the time you will not have to pay the UHT tax. So that's good, because that's most of you that'll probably be watching this video, and that's most of our clients. The catch is that the way the Underused Housing Tax Act was written requires a whole lot of people who will never have to pay the tax to still file a return. And this is also going to be one of the first instances I can think of where there's a penalty associated with owing nothing. For example, on a personal tax return, if you don't have an amount owing, there's no penalty. All the late filing penalties and late payment penalties are based on a percentage of what you owe. And so if you go to file your personal taxes and you either have a zero return or you have a refund, you could file your taxes 2 months, 6 months, 5 years late, and for most cases, there's no penalty. This is a very different situation. We find ourselves with the CRA trying to claim they're going to charge not just a penalty, but what I would deem to be a punitive penalty, simply for a lack of filing a return in which you likely owed nothing to begin with. I don't make the rules. I think that's kind of unfair, but because those are the rules, you need to be aware of them. So if you find yourself having to file a UHT return, even though you won't owe the tax, and you don't file by the deadline, they claim they're going to hit you with a penalty starting at $5,000. So it's not something to just shudder or shrug off and say it's no big deal, I'll just pay the minor penalty, because this is not a minor penalty, and maybe that's the point. So that's the first things to know. Now, second thing to know, a UHT return has normally just one deadline, and maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but they've chosen to make that deadline the same as a personal tax return. So you have to file your UHT return by April 30th of the following year, just like your personal taxes are. The only exception to that, and I believe it's going to be just a one-time exception, is this year, or more specifically, for tax year 2022. The UHT returns for tax year 2022 should have been due April 30th of this year, April 30th, 2023. But because there's been so much confusion even on CRA's part about this, they've given a one-time extension to October 31st, 2023. So that's just under a month away. So if you have to file a UHT return, You want to make sure you file it before the end of this month, or you potentially face a $5,000 plus penalty for not having done so. So don't miss that. Whatever you do, highlight, double sticky, boldface, like a week before that date, maybe I'd say like the 23rd, 24th of October. Make sure you do not miss that deadline, because that will be one of the most costly days in your life if that's the case. Now that we've kind of got all that out of the way, let's go back to the concept. If the UHT is designed to discourage foreign ownership of Canadian property, why are there several Canadians who are going to still have to file a return? Well, that's because they are looking for any indication where there might be an indication of a business going on. So the only Canadian citizens or Canadian permanent residents that should or will have to file a UHT return are one of two things. There's technically three, but I haven't met anyone that's going to fall under the third. So I'm just going to mention the two most common. And it's just one or both, like one of these. If you have even one of these situations, you'll need to file at least one UHT return. The first one, if you own a corporation, a Canadian corporation that's not traded on a stock exchange, so it's going to be a private Canadian corporation. That'll be most of our clients and many small business owners in Canada. So if you own a corporation and inside of that corporation, you own a residential dwelling, a house, a condo, maybe not timeshare, but a house or a condo or anything that's a permanent residential dwelling, a place you could live 365 days a year and rent out potentially, you would have to file a UHT return for the corporation that owns that residential property. You would need to file a UHT return for each residential property that corporation owns if it owns more than one. So that's the first thing. We haven't come across too many of our clients that are in that boat, but there are some. There are some that do own residential property through a corporation, and they will need to file a UHT return for their corporation. However, the second one is seeming to catch much more of our client base. And that is if you, as a person, so not through a corporation, but as an individual, if you own a rental property, and more specifically, if you own that rental property jointly with at least one other person. Normally, we wouldn't consider it to be such, but for the UHT, the Canada Revenue Agency has decided that that constitutes a partnership. So at least two people jointly owning a rental property constitutes, for this purpose, a partnership. And for that reason, those individuals will also each need to file a UHT return. So that actually is catching a lot of people. We have several clients and many people I know who own a rental property jointly with their spouse, with a child, with friends. All of you that have that rental property that's owned jointly with at least one other person, you are going to be required to file a UHT return. And as such, I'm going to suggest that you kind of follow the rest of this video so you can make sure you know what you have to do. So now that we've got that out of the way, I think I'm going to break this video up into two parts. This being part one is just to determine if this UHT stuff is even relevant to you. So just to recap, most people are not going to have to deal with the UHT at all. Some of you are going to have to file a UHT return, but won't have to pay the UHT tax. The two situations where you'll have to file a UHT return is either you have a corporation that owns residential property, and that, again, this is residential, not commercial. So if your corporation owns a commercial building or just a bare piece of land, you're good to go. You don't have to do anything, only if it owns a residential building. And two, if you own a rental property jointly with at least one other person, and therefore you are deemed to be a partnership and need to file. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that eliminates probably many of you who have watched this and stressing out, and now you can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that you don't have to deal with the UHT. For those of you that now realize you do have to deal with the UHT, I encourage you to watch my next video where I will go through the form and the process and kind of make sure that you are comfortable with what to do. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a good day.